A dozen sheriffs from Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas filed a lawsuit on Thursday to end marijuana legalization in Colorado. The suit claims the federal law overrides state law and that international treaties require Colorado to criminalize the drug. Patty, this is the fourth big lawsuit that is going against the state of Colorado about Amendment 64. What did you think about this one?
Well, I think the Colorado sheriffs who went in with Kansas, and is it Kansas and Nebraska on this one, probably could have chosen better compatriots. We already see how crazy the Nebraska-Oklahoma case is. I think Colorado's in a really good position to defend this law. It has the vote of the people. And not only that, we have public sentiment across the country now heading towards legalization or at least decriminalization of marijuana. So I'm not entirely sure why these sheriffs decided they had to do this now, but I will say this, they probably have other laws that they need to observe in their own counties.
I would imagine so. David, you are our esteemed lawyer at the table today. I read in some of the articles about this particular lawsuit that of the four that are against Colorado now, legally it's the weakest. But I don't know exactly if that's the case. What do you think?
Well, that's the assessment of Professor Sam Kamen at Denver University Law School, who is a very good law professor and also probably the leading law professor in the country on marijuana law. So I think his view counts for a lot. I would say, I wish I could say all these cases were hopeless and have no chance of success. I'm not so confident about that. The root of much evil in the world, always you can trace it back to Richard Nixon, our most criminal president, and the United Nations. In 1971, the United Nations created the Convention on Psychotropic Substances, an international treaty which the Nixon signed and the Senate ratified, and then they said, oh, well, gee, we've already had laws against drugs for a long time, but now we need to beef them up or expand them to comply with our treaty obligations under this, and that gets you the Controlled Substances Act of 1971, which is still the foundational modern anti-drug law. The lawsuit is correct to say that the United States has ratified treaties which require it to criminalize marijuana. On the other hand, legally speaking, Congress, the fact that the U.S. Senate ratified this treaty and acted within its constitutional powers in doing so, doesn't mean that the Senate or Congress as a whole has the power to commandeer state legislatures or the lawmakers of the state, the people themselves, into making laws against that. Even if it's a valid treaty which creates an international law obligation on the U.S. national government under our constitutional system, that doesn't mean that local governments and the people themselves can be forced to enact particular laws. And the case of New York versus United States from the early 1990s says that very clearly, that even when Congress is acting within its enumerated powers, they cannot commandeer the lawmaking process of the states.
Eric, as we see Governor Hickenlooper, as he's, I guess, named as one of the key defendants being governor of Colorado, and then Attorney General Cynthia Kaufman is the person who has to defend these and choose which ones to defend at which time. Politically, is it going to become a little tiring for those folks to go to these? Because it's not like either Hickenlooper or Kaufman were big supporters of Amendment 64. It's the law of the land. They'll uphold their oath, but I can't imagine this is how they wanted to be spending their time in either of their positions right now.
No, I think that's a good point, Dominic. But, you know, it's not like John Hickenlooper is sitting there and is going to spend the next several years of his life writing legal briefs, or for that matter, that Cynthia Kaufman is going to be writing legal briefs. She has a appellate staff, a very capable appellate staff in the Attorney General's office that will handle that form. This is what goes with being the governor of the state, the chief executive, and with being the Attorney General of the state. I flash back to the aftermath of 1992 and Amendment 2, the gay rights proposition that Colorado passed now better part of a quarter century ago, and that lawsuit that ultimately was reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court was called Romer v. Evans, I believe. Yeah. Now, it's not that Governor Roy Romer was a big cheerleader for the anti-gay rights cause. It's just he happened to be the chief executive of the state, and you get named in that capacity. Of the regular panelists, around this table, I'm perhaps a little bit lower on the scale in terms of cheerleading for Amendment 64. I have my doubts about it. I wrestle with the issue considerably, but I'm a little bit more of a skeptic on it. I think we won't know for 10 years or 20 years or longer in terms of the degree to which it is a success or not, or any long-term health ramifications. All that said, I'm even more skeptical of federal intervention. I'm more of a supporter of states' rights here. I think Colorado, along with other states, Alaska being the most recent, have the right to be laboratories of experimentation, to have sovereignty over some laws like this. I do think the burden is on the federal government to enunciate a policy that allows Colorado to pick its path, whether that path is the right path or the wrong path. And so I hope these lawsuits do not move forward or do not have traction.
Susan, we've seen other states start to get on the recreational pot bandwagon, Alaska and I believe Oregon. Do you think the anti-drug activists and maybe some law enforcement officials are seeing Colorado as their last stand to really stem this tide that is likely to grow rather than to recede?
Sure, if they can get sheriffs like Justin Smith in Larimer County, which is the lead plaintiff in Colorado in this case, who's essentially kind of more of a shock jock in some ways than a sheriff. I mean, he's better known for his bombastic and in some ways racist Facebook posts than his law enforcement. But look here at a sheriff who, in 1 week, is saying, you know, we've got to abide by federal law here. We have a duty to abide by federal law on this pot thing. In the same week, he's criticizing federal immigration policy in the executive order, and saying it was basically fed into an electorate, or millennials who were covertly fed white guilt by the school system. I mean, which is it? Are we going federal here? Or are we going state? So, this is the guy who created so much trouble, and in some ways rightly so, for Governor Hickenlooper on that whole apology about gun legislation. And he is a shock jock. And this lawsuit, like many of these pot lawsuits, aren't about the law. They're just about, making noise.
Getting some attention, you're saying.